Thank you, Lizzie. Good evening. My name is Julie Rogers Bascom, and I'm the Director of Learning and Leadership at the National Youth Leadership Council. I'm thrilled to be talking to you today about advocating for service learning. We know that young people have an important voice to share with stakeholders and with the community. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about how young people can use their voice, their experiences to advocate for service learning. NYLC is an organization. We're based in St. Paul, Minnesota. We've been around for almost 40 years. And our mission is to create a more just, sustainable, and peaceful world with young people, their schools, and communities through service learning. So we work with young leaders. We work on leadership development using service learning as a strategy to practice and really put to use the leadership skills. We also support educators. So we work with teachers and schools and out of school programs and classroom teachers to use service learning to meet their goals. And we also do a lot of advocating in the field of service learning. Some of you may be watching this who are involved in the Coalition for Service Learning. So we are a big supporter of all of your efforts. Just a reminder of the friends who are with us today, please mute your microphone when you're not talking. I invite you and encourage you to share your voice if you have something to say. I always love looking at faces. So if you're comfortable, turn that camera on so I can see all my new friends. Use the chat to ask questions and make comments. My friend and colleague, Lizzie Sanchez, will be here and will be helping monitor the chat as we go along. Feel free to use those emojis when you're feeling questioning or happy or something resonates. And I also invite you to have something to write with, because I'm going to be asking you some questions. In this presentation, I will be asking a lot of questions because each person's situation is a little bit different. So by answering the questions, you can help tailor what your advocacy message is and how you want to go about advocating for service learning. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about how do you advocate for service learning? And as I do with every one of my webinars, I start off by just taking a moment to pause. I want us to center ourselves. So I ask you to just take this moment with me and center yourself. Maybe that means sitting up tall. Maybe that means closing your eyes. Do whatever you need to center yourself for a moment. Next, I'm going to invite you to listen to your surroundings. What do you hear? Are there car noises? Are there children in the background? Is there a heater going on, like the one that's in my space right now? What do you hear? And then I'm also going to ask you to set an intention for how you're going to use what you're learning today. There's a reason why you came here. So think about, what is it that you hope to use this information? How do you hope to use this information? Thank you for taking that moment. It also, that not only is good for us to get in the space of how we're going to use this information, but it also helps me as a presenter, as somebody who's talking at you, and I hope we'll be talking with you, to think about my intention for today. I like to start off with some definitions because I think there can be some confusion about what service and service learning is. This is about service learning today. So our definition at NYLC of service learning is that service learning is an approach to teaching and learning. So it's not just a project. It is actually that we have hope for outcomes in service learning. So we hope young people are reaching academic standards or social emotional learning skills, Or maybe they're practicing 21st century skills, creativity, communication, cooperation. But there's a real, there is a real goal in mind. So it's an approach to teaching and learning in which students use academic and civic knowledge. So they're growing their academic and they're practicing that civic engagement muscle. And they're using their skills to address genuine community needs, not necessarily what we think other people need, but what the community needs. And advocacy. What is advocacy? Advocacy is an action that speaks in favor of or recommends or argues for a cause, supports or defends and pleads on behalf of others. So advocacy, one of the deep important concepts of advocacy is you're trying to change a system. There's lots of different kinds of service learning. There is creating awareness. There is being engaged in some kind of service direct or indirect. There's advocacy. So advocacy is one of those types of service learning. So this presentation is really about how you can create your advocacy message. So I am going to ask you, this is a Slido poll. I'm going to ask you to contribute. What are your hopes for the future of service learning? Now, this could be the future of service learning for our nation, our world. It could be the hopes of your hopes for the future of service learning in your classroom. To use Slido, you can take your camera, and if you have a QR code, you can, or QR scanner, you can scan that code, or I've also found that if I use my camera, it will actually take me to that site. So go to that site, and if you don't have a camera or a phone, you can always go to slido.com and enter that number 111814. So I'm going to take a pause for a minute and ask you to consider this question. What are your hopes for the future of service learning? To continue seeing youth involvement in service learning? Absolutely. That all students can be engaged. Yes, all students. And if you'd like to unmute yourself and add a comment out loud, I invite you to do that. Maybe 30 more seconds. Oh, quality. I think one of the important aspects of service learning and how we engage teachers and out of school professionals and young people is to look at the standards of quality service learning, like meaningful service and linked to learning and reflection. I'm going to go ahead here. So one of the things that I want to mention is that today, as we're talking about advocacy, I am going to explain it, an experience through the IPART cycle. Now, IPART is the student learning experience where we talk about investigation, we talk about planning and preparing, we talk about action, and reflection and demonstration. So as I walk through this conversation about advocacy, I'm going to be using those stages to help frame it. If you are working with young people, then this might be another way that you can engage young people in using the IPART cycle as they advocate. And again, I will have lots of questions. Lots of questions. Our first stage is investigation. And I think this is so important because oftentimes we can forget to do some background information, get some background information, and then it becomes just getting ready for the project or getting ready for the advocacy action. So it's really important, I think, to start with that personal reflection, that personal investigation. Why does service learning matter to you? Why are you wanting to advocate for service learning? Why is it important to you, to your community, to our country, to our state, to your school? I think one of the things that's important is that service learning has some real outcomes that we talk about, and we hope for young people. And it's important to understand why you will use service learning and what your goals are. So why is it important? And then my final question on this page is, what is your service learning story? And I ask you to consider that because when you're influencing other people, trying to change a system or trying to change a process, talking about your story is what is very compelling. That people like to hear stories. They always say that people, like in fundraising, people don't give to programs, they give to people. So people who want, who are in positions of making change, they're going to be impacted by your story. Now, so that's kind of the personal aspect, kind of your thinking about you, why it's important to you. But now I want us to think about systemic. What are some of the systemic considerations during investigation? Again, remember, we're not planning the project yet. We're really looking for information. And so one of the things I ask you to consider is, what's the history of service learning in your school or in your community? Why has that been important? We know that service learning about 10 years ago was defunded by some federal legislation. So young people who might be watching this, who are considering talking to legislators about opening up or supporting an effort that the Coalition for Service Learning is leading, think about how service learning has had an impact before and what you're missing right now. So think about the history. How has it changed? I think I just mentioned that. And then I also wanted you to think about, who else do you need to talk to learn more? Who else can give you some information and some feedback? I like to think about 4 different ways to collect some more information during your investigation stage. Read what you can, think about newspapers, magazines, stories. Read about service learning on the internet. Talk to people who have been involved in service learning in your school, in your state. Also, interview some people. I think we sometimes forget that investigation, we can interview people to get their thoughts and ideas. So interview people who might have experienced service learning, who were changed. I think service learning can be transformational. So talk to people and hear their stories, and talk to people about who else wants service learning. So you're starting to build that team, right? So you don't have to do it by yourself. Oftentimes to gather more information, you can do surveys. Sometimes that kind of data can be very persuasive to people who are decision makers, who are in leadership roles. If they have survey data that says that people are really interested in service learning and really want some change, that can support your argument. And observe. Maybe you go to a service learning experience and watch how kids are engaged, how young people are asking questions, the change that they've made, the garden that has been growing for 6 years, the community garden that the young people have started. So think about those things: media, interview, survey, and observation. Those are great ways to consider how to build your case. So I'm going to ask you to think about this. Identify the need. What is it that you want to change? Maybe you want to have more funding for service learning. That's a real need right now. Maybe you want to have some more course offerings that use service learning. I know in the higher ed, lots of programs are looking at service learning as a way to meet their civic engagement requirements and hope for outcomes. Maybe you're a student and you want to see service learning in your classroom. So you've been enjoying and have been engaged in a service learning experience, and you want to see that more in your school or in your classroom. Maybe you're wanting to move towards making sure that it's student-led versus adult-led action. Oftentimes, service projects can be led by adults because adults have decided this is what needs to be done. So I'm here to encourage us all to think about, what are the young people interested in? What are they concerned about? So this is where I'm going to ask you to pull out that piece of paper and a pencil, or maybe you're doing it online, and take a moment to write down what needs to change. I'm going to give us a minute. I'm going to play a little bit of music while we consider, what is it that you would like to change? What needs to change? Thank you. I think sometimes when we do presentations, when we listen to people, we don't take a pause and think about what's impacting us. Let's take a pause and think about what you would like to see, what needs to change in your space so that service learning is used more, that's more of a part of the culture or your school. Would anyone like to share, make a comment about what they would see as a change they would like to see to you in using service learning? We're a small group here, so please feel free to either put it in the chat or unmute yourself and share a thought.
Julie, I think what you were saying is really visionary. So empowering the students themselves to learn the context of the community and then learn best practices, do that investigation piece, right? So you also said, what does the community need? It's not so much about what we think the community needs. So from there, growing program in a way that's meaningful for students, empowering them to do both the implementation and assisting them with the research as needed. And they are very capable of engaging. We know that, right?
Absolutely. And that investigation stage is so important. So it's not it. So we create the habit of ready, set, go. So I've worked with a lot of young people who just want to do the project. But in order to have a successful project, or for some of that learning to happen, we need to do that investigation, and we need to do that planning and preparing. Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you. Anybody else? You can go ahead and move on. So this is the time when you decide the action. So even though we talk about IPART, investigation, planning, preparing, action, we're actually right after the investigation. That's when we decide what kind of action we're going to take. So your action is dependent on your findings. So I encourage you, if you are if you are trying to advocate for service learning, find out who's on your team. So you don't have to do this by yourself. It might be, and I encourage you to find some caring adults. It might be other young people. It might, who knows who else you can bring to your team, community members, parents. I see Caleb said one growth will be to need to centralized and unifying problem that will need to be addressed. Also prioritizing everyone's voice. Absolutely. That is so key to building a team. Thank you, Caleb. So we're going to talk a little bit about what kind of action you want to take. So I think a lot of times when we think about advocacy, we think about making phone calls. And I think that that is really important because our legislators, if you're reaching out to legislators, they do track how many phone calls come in. So make sure that you prepare yourself. Make sure you find the right person to talk to. Make sure you write a script so you know what you're going to say. I think that's really important. You don't have to wing it, and you'll feel better making that call if you know what you're going to say. Practice, we talk a lot about elevator speeches. So practice that elevator speech. Keep it short and concise, relevant and timely. And as I said before, making it personal. Share your story, because I think that's really what can draw people in to that kind of experience. Share your story. So letters and emails. I think that's really an important document and effort to share with people who are in positions of power, who are the decision makers, because you also have a document to show, yes, this is what I did. It helps you. Some of us need to write things down to help us think and to process. And I also think the same thing applies. Keep it short and concise. Keep it relevant and timely. And think about who are the people that you need to tell that story to. Who are the people that you need to write the letter to? I think another option that some young people have done and have shared with me is they have written letters to the editor, or they've written op-eds, opinion and editorials, because that's another way to share the message in a bigger context. So think about those kinds of ways to advocate. So sometimes it's phone calls and letters and articles, but also it's in-person conversations. And I think this is when youth voice really shines. I think that's when it's really important to get your story straight, your elevator pitch. So when you're meeting somebody in person, a legislator, administrator, school board, community groups, whatever, do some research on who needs to know and what kind of system they are in. So if you're approaching a legislator, make sure that you go through the channels. Usually they have a scheduler. So you'll email the scheduler and ask for 15 minutes or longer, tell them what you want, and they will help you make an appointment. Find out if it's the right person. If it's somebody who is in your district, or if it's somebody who's on the education committee. Understand who are the people who are making those kinds of decisions. That's really important. So knowing who needs to know and some of the systems. Prepare an agenda. Make sure you walk in there and you're able to say, this is what I would like to talk to you about. 1, 2, 3. Their time is often limited. Sometimes you'll get 15 minutes, sometimes you'll get 5, sometimes you'll get 60 minutes. I think it just depends on who you're talking to and what their time space is. But so make sure to prepare an agenda. Include other voices. Remember that word, see that word up there that's highlighted in orange? Team. You don't have to be the only voice. In fact, sometimes a strong voice allows other people to share their story as well. So consider who needs to speak and how they're going to speak. And one of the key important aspects of when you're going to visit somebody to change their mind or to encourage some kind of action, don't forget the ask. Before you leave there, make sure you have said, this is what I want you to do. I'm talking to you because this is the change I want to see. Will you join me in making this happen? So don't forget that ask. And again, stories, stories, stories. Another aspect of type of action, you can create a messaging campaign. Now, these can be flyers, they can be TikToks, they can be videos. I'm going to show you a couple of ideas of messaging products that really caught my eye. I'm going to ask you to, what are these messages advocating for? Some of it, it's pretty easy to see. Anybody? It's about cyberbullying. Absolutely. It's about cyberbullying and some of the data. So this is really an important, if you craft this to make sure that you're asking for some kind of change. What about this one? This is about vaping and some data. See, that's why it's really important to have all that data from your investigation. It's really important to make sure that you have that available to help craft your message. And our final one. This one, we know, I mean, there's no secret to this. It's about forests. It's about saving our forests. And it tells the story of how they won. So those are 3 examples of how to craft a message. I want to share one video with y'all. And then I want you to consider, what are they advocating for in this one?
If you let me play. If you let me play sports. I will like myself more. I'll have more self-confidence. If you let me play sports. If you let me play. If you let me play. I'll be 60% less likely to get breast cancer. I will suffer less depression. If you let me play sports. I will be more likely to leave a man who beats me. If you let me play. I'll be less likely to get pregnant before I want to. I will learn what it means to be strong. To be strong. If you let me play sports. If you let me play sports.
So what are they advocating for?
Equity and inclusion in sports.
Yes. This is thank you, Miriam. This is actually a very old ad, 1995. And it just resonated with me because it was youth voices. So that's a real powerful campaign to me. Any other thoughts on that video?
If you let me play. If you let me play sports.
So think back, I asked you to write down what is it that you would like to change? What do you think needs to change? What kind of action would you want to take? Just take a moment to think about that. And some of the types of actions you choose have barriers. If you don't have somebody who can film, that then doing some kind of a video might not work. If you know somebody who's really good on the phone, then maybe the phone calls is the way to go. Look at your team and see what kind of skills, talents, and interests they bring to the table and use those skills. Or if somebody is wanting to build those skills, maybe somebody is really afraid of being in person. Or really afraid to make presentations. Maybe this is an opportunity for them to grow. So now, see that little cycle, the student learning cycle in the corner, IPART? This is our second step, planning and preparing. So real quickly, just make sure that you get everything ready to take action, create that action plan, identify who you're going to reach, craft your message, and your ask, and be persistent. Create a timeline. Make sure that you are concise, relevant, and personal. That seems to be the words that should be flashing on the screen right now. Concise and relevant and personal. Then you act. I use this swoosh because Mikey just says, do it. You know, just ask, just do it. Make sure when you're doing some of the things that you're doing, whether it be an email or a phone call, make sure to follow up. Did they receive it? It's one thing to say, yeah, I sent an email, but make sure that they somehow have received it, because that's really important. Sometimes things fall through the cracks. I was working with a group of young people, and they were advocating for some change at their school, and they came up to me and they talked to me about the change that they wanted to see. And I said, oh, I think that's a great idea. What are you going to do next? And they said, next? Well, that's not, I'm not doing anything. I was just going to tell you about it. So make sure that you follow up and you ask, what do they want to change? What is it that it needs, you want someone to do? And then also wrapping up, don't forget that thank you, confirm next steps. So now we're through investigation, planning and preparing, and action. You know what the next one is, if you've been doing service learning, it's reflection. We really encourage reflection before, during, and after, but this is a really good time to pause and say, what else needs to be done? Because sometimes, as I said in that story, sometimes, okay, we've done the action, okay, we're all done, but probably not. There's probably some other things that need to be done, some other action to be taken. And then our final stage in the service learning cycle is to demonstrate. And this is really about sharing with the world, whatever world you want to share with, understand and maybe ask yourself the question, who needs to know what happened? So is it the community? Is it the newspaper? Is it the other stakeholders? So think about who needs to know what happened. And then my final question, and I told you there would be a lot of questions, is how will you tell them? You could, I have an image right here of a science fair. You could have some kind of a showing, a representation of what you did. It could be a newsletter or another video. How are you wanting to share what you did to take action, and hopefully some of the positive outcomes? I'm going to pause here. Any questions? This is like a down and dirty short. How do you advocate? Any thoughts or ideas or things you could share that might be useful for other young people?
Julie, I like the example that you gave and kind of the methodology and the pedagogy behind it of you talking to the students and saying, well, what's next? So that's really an empowering moment for the students to think of themselves as advocates and agents for change, because ultimately that's what we want from future leaders, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Miriam. I think that really is sometimes a very different thing as teachers to let them take the lead. But you're right, that's practicing what I like to call that civic engagement muscle. I did want to leave you with a website to go to, coalition4sl.org. It is a coalition of groups of people who are concerned and interested in service learning and how to make sure that we get some funding for the country, for all states, for all schools, to have some kind of support, financial support for service learning. And it's a national group. On that website, you can see that /toolkit. There's a wonderful toolkit that was put together by a young person who was helping us, I think it was last year, with some scripts What would an email look like? What would a script look like if you're going to make a phone call? So it gives you some ideas. And quite frankly, if you Google scripts for advocacy scripts or advocacy letters, you come up with some great ideas. Don't take whatever everybody says. Make sure that you tailor it to what you need, but use some of the resources that are out there. And those of you who are maybe interested in joining the Coalition for Service Learning, there's an opportunity for you to do that too, just to show support. It is an open membership, so we welcome other people to be a part of this important effort. So I'm going to ask you, what's your next step? You can either unmute or put it in the chat. What's your next step? After you've sat and listened to me for 45 minutes. What is it that you want to do with this information? I've asked you, what is it that needs to change? How might you try to make that change? What is your next step? I'm going to pause for a moment and again, go back to my music. Well, thank you, Miriam. Reflecting on Miriam's next steps are reflecting on and implementing best practices shared today. And Melissa is mentioned putting together a team of youth and adults. Awesome. That is terrific. Really important next steps. I did want to share with you my information. If you have questions or would like any kind of follow-up, I'm thrilled to have been with you today. Again, my name is Julie Rogers Bascom, and you can reach me at jrbascom@nylc.org. I'd love to hear how you are sharing your service learning stories and what you need to advocate for. Because if there's anything that I can do to support, I really would love to be there for you. Again, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and for all that you do for young people.
Thank you so much, Julie.
My pleasure. My pleasure.